So from Jennifer Hewitt from the Australian Financial Review in quarantine in Sydney, let's cross to another quarantine if there's such an expression, in Hobart. Senator Claire Chandler, welcome to Watercooler.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Tell me, what did you do to deserve getting locked up in your home for a fortnight?
Well, we had our essential traveller status revoked by the state controller in the week or so leading up to this last sitting fortnight. So previously we were able to come back to Tassie and go about our business after a sitting week, but now we're not so fortunate. We're subject to the same rules that all other Tasmanians are, insofar as we have to quarantine at home upon our return. So lots of Zoom meetings for me for the next couple of weeks.
But it's hard, isn't it? I mean, your normal day job requires that you get out and talk to people. So it's not perfect.
It's not, but at the same time, in 2020, it's sort of become the new normal, and to an extent, we've got used to it, and a lot of constituents and stakeholders now are far happier to have you make a phone call or do a Zoom meeting. Obviously, nothing can replace face-to-face contact, and certainly that's been my experience. But yeah, it's not too bad. We're getting there.
Well, Claire, one of the great privileges of presenting this webcast for the Menzies Research Centre since the lockdown started is the opportunity to bring some of the great talents, the new talent in Parliament, to a wider audience beyond their state. So, in that capacity, I welcome you. You entered the Senate last year, I think, after the 2019 election, and you're part of a whole new cohort there, aren't you?
I am. There are quite a few of us new class of 2019 senators that all started around the same time, and it has been a very different experience to what I originally expected when I was pre-selected. 2 years ago today, I was pre-selected in the number 2 spot on the Tasmanian Senate ticket, and I certainly thought at that point that our prospects were not looking quite so fabulous electorally speaking, but as the PM said, we do believe in miracles, and it was amazing to come to Parliament in Canberra with a whole big new class of 2019 incoming parliamentarians. So there's a good sense of camaraderie around the group, I think. Yeah,
particularly in the Senate, I see there's not to downplay what's happening in the House, but in the Senate you've got some really new cohort. There's you, there's people of your age or around that age, which I think gives a great hope for the future of the party in Parliament.
I like to think so. Certainly myself and James Patterson, Amanda Stoker, John O'Duniam, Alex Antic, there's a good group of young ones coming up through, or younger ones coming up through. And I think it does say something really positive about the future of the Liberal Party, that we have got some younger parliamentarians coming in. Phil Thompson in the House of Representatives is another great example. Yeah,
and from such a variety of backgrounds. Now, I think you and I first met, when you were president of the Young Liberals, I think.
Yes.
And I think we were having a discussion then about, the imperative of getting more women into Parliament on our side, more diversity generally, I guess, but particularly women. We succeeded brilliantly, I think, with yourself included. The balance in the Senate now is much, much closer to where we'd like it to be, I think, on our side of Parliament.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting thinking back to those conversations that we were having back in 2016 when, you're right, I was Federal Young Liberal President and leading the piece around how we could engage better with young women in the party. And one of the main impediments to that, as I saw it back in 2016, was that we didn't have, or in the lead up to 2016, we didn't have many younger women in the Parliament, and now we do, and I think that's great because it means that younger conservative thinking people have female role models to look up to. So I'm certainly trying to do everything I can to ensure that we get more women in the party generally, and more women excited about the prospect of running for Parliament, but particularly ensuring that our young women in the party feel looked after and listened to.
Later on, we'll be talking to Douglas Murray, who wrote that brilliant book, The Madness of Crowds, and one of the themes which he explores in there is a whole transgender movement and just how far this has gone in a very short amount of time. You, I think, have been looking closely at how this impacts women's sport. Tell me about it.
So when I first started as a senator just over 12 months ago, I was inundated with correspondence from men, women, mums, dads across the country who were all concerned about a set of guidelines that Sport Australia had developed around transgender inclusion in sport. And their main concern was the impact that in allowing biological men to play women's sport would have on women's sport as it pertained particularly to the safety of women and the ability of women to play on an even and fair playing field. So it sort of snowballed from there. I asked a couple of questions to Sport Australia at Estimates back in February, found out such shocking concepts that they haven't actually defined what the term woman means. I find that quite puzzling, that the peak sporting body in this country doesn't know what a woman is, particularly at a time when we're trying to encourage more women to get involved in sport. But then recently we've seen World Rugby as an international code develop some research that basically plays out the concerns that these Australians have been raising with me for the last 12 months, that there is a 20 to 30% greater likelihood that a woman will be injured on the rugby field if she's tackled by a biological man. So it's a very complex area of life and of law that we need to work out, but my position is that women's sport needs to be preserved for biological women so that they can play on an even playing field and they know that they're safe when they're playing.
Look, that makes enormous sense to me, and I'm sure, you know, the sort of good people who tune in to watch this interview. But it's still controversial, right? Did you fear in taking this stand that you were going to take some flack from, you know, the cancel culture brigade or whatever it is?
Honestly, I was so buoyed by the groundswell of support I received on social media, even on Twitter, which is quite shocking. I don't spend too much time on Twitter, but some of the comments were quite complimentary around my advocacy, and the emails and the letters I received from constituents right across the country that shared my concerns. So no, initially I wasn't too concerned about getting cancelled, so to speak, and I still don't consider myself to have been cancelled, but obviously given the speech that I gave to the Senate on Thursday night, I have found myself at the pointy end of a complaint by the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Commission, so we'll have to see how that plays out.
It's mad, isn't it, Claire? Absolute madness. I mean, it makes no sense to me, and yet you're essentially taking a stand on behalf of women here.
Absolutely. And the concern that I have about this more broadly, Nick, is that it is a women's rights issue, but it is also a free speech issue. I mean, we've seen time and time again in this country people being hauled before quasi-judicial processes for saying what they believe in. And in this instance, all of my advocacy has been based on fact, on the, like I said, referring back to those statistics that World Rugby has come up with on the clear evidence that suggests there is a safety concern here and that there's also a fairness concern for women in sport. So it's a little bit troubling when you have a body of evidence behind you that supports your perspective and yet people are still getting dragged in front of tribunals for stating what is only described as 100% factual information.
Well, it's been good to talk to you. But before we let you go, though, just give us some insights into Tasmania. I think no active cases, I think, as we speak, could change in Tasmania right now. Does that mean you're allowed to pretty much, you know, do whatever you want, go to restaurants, all that kind of thing?
Yes, with the exception of the fact I'm currently sitting at home for the next few days. Yes, in Tasmania we are enjoying a level of freedom within the state. There have been a couple of, I think, justifiable grumbles within the community over the last few weeks, concerns about students not being able to dance at their formals at the end of the year, around you know, when you can, the circumstances in which you can go to a bar or a pub and when you can drink, or when you can stand and drink, or where you can sit and eat food and drink. That there are, you know, as we've seen everywhere, there are rules that are sort of dictating our lives now in a way that we're not really accustomed to, and people understandably are coming to terms with what that means. generally, I think business confidence is pretty good in Tasmania. Certainly when I was able to get around the state before we went back to Canberra in the last fortnight, the stories I was hearing from small business people were generally quite positive. But there's also a recognition now, I think, that our livelihood in the medium to longer term is contingent on those border restrictions relaxing at some point. And the Premier has named the 1st of December as the date for that, and I'll certainly be looking very closely to see if there's any possibility we can bring that back a little bit closer so our small businesses can properly get back up and running again and back to normal.
Let's hope so. First day of summer, just at the time of year when we're beginning to think it may be warm enough to go to Tasmania. So thank you, Claire, for joining us. I was just about to say,
summer is a beautiful season in Tasmania, so let's hope that 1st of December is the date.
Thank you.